I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I never thought a Tuesday morning could change everything. At 64, I believed I'd weathered every storm life could throw at me. Harold's death 3 months ago had been devastating enough, but I was managing, taking it one day at a time, just like he would have wanted. The call from the attorney's office came precisely at 9:00 a.m. Mrs. Evans, we're ready to proceed with the estate settlement. Can you be here at 2:00 today? The woman's voice was professional, almost cold. I agreed. Of course. After months of waiting, I was eager to finally close this chapter and move forward. I chose my navy blue dress. The one Harold always said brought out my eyes. He bought it for me on our 35th wedding anniversary just 2 years ago. As I clasped the pearl necklace he gave me for our wedding, I caught my reflection in the bedroom mirror. The woman looking back at me seemed older, more fragile than I remembered. 3 months of grief had carved new lines around my eyes, turned my auburn hair more silver than I cared to admit. The drive downtown took longer than expected. Traffic was heavier than usual, and I found myself drumming my fingers nervously on the steering wheel. I wasn't sure why I felt so anxious. This should have been straightforward. Harold and I had discussed his will many times over the years. Everything was supposed to come to me, with provisions for our son Lucas and his family after my passing. I pulled into the parking garage beneath the law office building, my hands slightly trembling as I turned off the engine. The concrete walls felt cold and unwelcoming. I gathered my purse and the folder of documents I'd been asked to bring, took a deep breath, and headed toward the elevator. That's when I heard the voice. Ma'am, wait. I turned to see a man approaching me from behind one of the concrete pillars. He was probably in his 50s, wearing clothes that had seen better days, a worn jacket, faded jeans, scuffed boots. His hair was unkempt, and he had the weathered look of someone who spent too much time outdoors. My first instinct was to keep walking, maybe even run. Harold had always warned me about being alone in parking garages, but something in his eyes stopped me. They weren't threatening or wild. They were concerned, almost desperate. Please, Mrs. Evans, I need to tell you something important, he said, staying a respectful distance away. You're Harold's widow, right? My heart began pounding. How did this stranger know my name? Know about Harold. I don't know who you are, but I need you to leave me alone, I said, trying to keep my voice steady while reaching for my phone. Ma'am, please, I know how this looks, but I worked for Morrison and Associates upstairs. I was let go 3 weeks ago, but before they fired me, I overheard things. Things about your husband's will. I froze. Morrison and Associates was Harold's law firm, the same firm I was about to meet with. The man glanced around nervously, as if checking to make sure we weren't being watched. Your daughter-in-law, Mia, she's been in contact with certain people at the firm. There are documents, things she's had prepared. My mouth went dry. What are you talking about? Ma'am, I can't prove it yet, but I think she's been planning to alter your husband's will. She's been telling people you're not mentally competent to handle the estate. She has medical records, statements from people claiming you've been acting confused, forgetful. The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the side of my car for support. That's impossible. I've never been diagnosed with anything. I'm perfectly fine. I know, ma'am. That's why I've been waiting here, hoping to catch you before the meeting. She wasn't expecting you to show up today. She told Mr. Morrison you probably wouldn't even remember the appointment. My anger flared, overriding my fear. How dare she? How dare anyone question my mental state? The man nodded sympathetically. There's more, ma'am. She's been forging documents, making it look like your husband wanted to change his will in his final weeks. She has fake medical reports saying he was concerned about your ability to manage finances. I felt like I was drowning. None of this made sense. Harold had never expressed any concerns about me managing money. If anything, I was the one who handled most of our finances throughout our marriage. Why are you telling me this? I asked, studying his face for any sign of deception. Because I liked your husband, ma'am. He was always kind to me when he came to the office. And because what they're doing isn't right. I may not have much, but I still have my conscience. I looked at this stranger. this apparently homeless man who was risking whatever little he had left to warn me. "What's your name?" "Eddie, ma'am. Eddie Kowalski. I was a paralegal at Morrison & Associates for 12 years before they decided I knew too much about their side business." Side business. Eddie glanced around again. "They've been helping certain clients manipulate wills and estates, taking large fees for making inconvenient family members disappear from inheritance documents. Your daughter-in-law has been paying them very well." The elevator dinged in the distance, and Eddie stepped back. "Ma'am, you need to be very careful in there. They're expecting you to just sign papers without reading them carefully. Don't let them pressure you into anything." Before I could ask more questions, he reached into his pocket and handed me a small USB drive. I made copies of what I could before they escorted me out. "The original will, medical reports from your husband's actual doctor. It's not complete, but it might help." Then he melted back into the shadows between the cars. I stood there for several minutes, my mind reeling from everything he'd told me. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as the ravings of a disturbed man, but something deep in my gut told me he was telling the truth. I thought about Mia, my daughter-in-law of 8 years. She had always been sweet to my face, but I'd noticed little things over the years. The way she whispered to Lucas when I entered a room, how she always seemed to steer conversations away from me during family gatherings. The subtle looks of irritation when I spoke about Harold and our life together. With shaking hands, I pressed the elevator button. As the doors closed, I caught a glimpse of Eddie watching me from behind a pillar, his expression filled with worry. The ride to the 15th floor felt eternal. When the doors opened, I stepped into the plush reception area of Morrison & Associates. The mahogany furniture and expensive artwork that once impressed me now seemed sinister, like a beautiful trap designed to lure unsuspecting victims. "Mrs. Evans," the receptionist said with a practiced smile. "They're waiting for you in conference room A." As I walked down the hallway, my heels clicking on the polished marble floor, I noticed how quiet everything seemed. Too quiet. Most of the office doors were closed, and I could hear muffled conversations behind them. I paused outside conference room A, my hand on the brass handle. Through the frosted glass, I could see several figures seated around a large table. I recognized one silhouette immediately, Mia's petite frame and distinctive hair. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door. The room was exactly as I expected. Intimidating. 3 men in expensive suits sat on one side of the table with Mia on the other side. She looked up as I entered, and for just a moment, I saw something flash across her face. Surprise fear. It was gone so quickly I almost thought I'd imagined it. Then she smiled. That same sweet smile she'd been giving me for 8 years. "Oh, Mary, I didn't think you were coming today." The way she said it confirmed everything Eddie had told me. "Hello, Mia," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Of course I'm here. This is about my husband's estate." The lead attorney, a thin man with silver hair and cold eyes, gestured to an empty chair. "Mrs. Evans, please have a seat. We have several documents that require your signature today." As I sat down, I noticed Mia fidgeting with her wedding ring, twisting it around her finger repeatedly. She wouldn't meet my eyes directly, instead focusing on the stack of papers in front of her. "Before we begin," I said, placing my purse firmly on the table, "I'd like to understand exactly what we're discussing today. My husband and I went over his will many times. I'm familiar with his wishes." The attorney exchanged a quick glance with his colleagues. "Mrs. Evans, there have been some recent developments. Your husband made certain amendments to his will in his final weeks, expressing concerns about—" "Stop," I interrupted, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "What kind of concerns?" Mia finally looked at me, her eyes wide with what appeared to be genuine concern. "Mary, Harold was worried about your health. He mentioned several incidents where you seemed confused, forgetful. He wanted to make sure the estate was handled properly." The words felt like a slap across my face. "Incidents? What incidents?" One of the other attorneys slid a folder across the table. "Mrs. Evans, we have documentation of several occasions where family members noted concerning behavior, memory lapses, confusion about dates and names, difficulty managing household finances." I opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were what appeared to be medical reports, written statements, even photographs. My breath caught as I recognized Mia's handwriting on one of the statements dated just 6 weeks ago. Mildred became extremely agitated when asked about grocery shopping. I read aloud. She couldn't remember what she had purchased or how much money she had spent. When Lucas tried to help her organize her receipts, she accused him of trying to steal from her. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the paper. This is completely false. I have never accused Lucas of stealing anything. Mary, Mia's voice was soft, almost pitying. You did say those things. We were all very worried about you. That's why Harold decided he needed to make arrangements. I stared at her. This woman I had welcomed into my family, who had sat at my dinner table countless times, who had smiled and hugged me at every holiday gathering. The person looking back at me now was a stranger. What arrangements? I managed to ask. The lead attorney cleared his throat. Your husband amended his will to establish a trust. The estate would be managed by a trustee, in this case, your son, Lucas, with provisions for your care and living expenses. The room started spinning. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. You're telling me Harold didn't trust me to handle my own finances. It wasn't about trust, Mia said quickly. It was about protection. Harold loved you so much. Mary, he just wanted to make sure you were taken care of. I closed my eyes, trying to process what was happening. When I opened them again, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In the corner of the conference room, I spotted a small recording device. Its red light blinking steadily. Are you recording this meeting? I asked. The attorneys looked uncomfortable. It's standard practice for estate settlements, one of them said. Standard practice to record a grieving widow without her consent. Before anyone could answer, there was a soft knock on the door. A secretary peered in. Mr. Morrison, there's someone here to see you. He says it's urgent. The lead attorney frowned. We're in the middle of a meeting. Sir, he says his name is Eddie Kowalski, and he has information about this case. I watched as all the color drained from Mia's face. She looked like she might be sick. I don't know anyone by that name, Morrison said quickly. Tell him we're busy. Actually, I said, standing up, I'd like to hear what Mr. Kowalski has to say. Mary, I don't think that's necessary, Mia said, her voice higher than usual. We should just focus on getting through these documents. But it was too late. Eddie appeared in this doorway, looking cleaner than he had in the parking garage, but still obviously out of place in the expensive law office. Mrs. Evans, he said, nodding at me respectfully. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have something you need to see. Morrison stood up abruptly. Sir, you're trespassing. I'm calling security. Go ahead, Eddie said calmly. But first, Mrs. Evans should know that I have copies of the original documents, the real ones from before they were altered. The room went dead silent. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Eddie reached into a worn messenger bag and pulled out a manila folder. I made copies before they fired me. Your husband's original will dated 6 months ago, and the real medical reports from his doctor, not the fake ones they created. Mia suddenly stood up, swaying slightly. I don't feel well, she mumbled. Sit down, Mia, I said, my voice harder than I'd ever heard it. You're going to want to hear this. Eddie opened the folder and pulled out several documents. Mrs. Evans, your husband never changed his will. These people, he gestured to the attorneys, have been working with your daughter-in-law to create false documents. They forged your husband's signature and fabricated medical reports to make it look like he questioned your mental capacity. That's preposterous, Morrison sputtered. This man is clearly disturbed. We have witnesses to Mr. Evans's concerns about his wife's condition. You mean the witnesses your firm paid? Eddie asked calmly. I have the receipts for those payments, too. Mia made a small whimpering sound and suddenly collapsed back into her chair, her face white as paper. For a moment, I thought she had fainted, but her eyes were still open, darting frantically around the room like a trapped animal. Why? I asked her, my voice barely above a whisper. Why would you do this to me? Mia's mouth opened and closed several times before any words came out. Michael and I have debts. Mary, the house, his business. Everything is mortgaged to the limit. You needed to steal from me. I finished for her. Eddie placed the original will in front of me. Mrs. Evans, this is your husband's real will, signed and witnessed properly. Everything he owned goes to you, exactly as you believed. I looked down at Harold's familiar signature, the one I had seen him write thousands of times over our 42 years of marriage. Seeing it there, real and unchanged, brought tears to my eyes. "How long have you been planning this?" I asked Mia. She was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. "It wasn't supposed to hurt you. We were going to make sure you were comfortable." "The trust would have provided for everything you needed," Morrison added, trying to sound reasonable. "While you controlled every penny," I said. Morrison was frantically shuffling papers, probably trying to hide evidence. "Mrs. Evans, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Perhaps we should reschedule this meeting." "No," I said firmly. "We're going to finish this right now." I looked around the room at these people who had tried to rob me of my husband's final gift to me, not just his money, but his trust, the woman who had smiled at me while plotting behind my back, the attorneys who had been willing to fabricate documents for the right price. But I also looked at Eddie, this man who had nothing to gain and everything to lose by speaking up for me, a man who had risked whatever little stability he had left to make sure I knew the truth. "What happens now?" I asked him. Eddie looked at the attorneys with disgust. "Now we call the police." As he reached for his phone, Mia let out a small sob and slumped forward, finally fainting for real this time. But I felt no sympathy for her. The woman who had just collapsed wasn't the daughter-in-law I thought I knew. She was a stranger who had been wearing my daughter-in-law's face for 8 years. And I was about to find out just how deep her deception ran. The police arrived within 20 minutes, but those 20 minutes felt like hours. Mia had regained consciousness and sat slumped in her chair, no longer bothering to maintain her innocent facade. The sweet, caring daughter-in-law I thought I knew had vanished completely, replaced by someone I didn't recognize at all. Detective Sarah Chen was a woman about my age, with kind but sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She listened patiently as Eddie explained what he knew, examining the documents he had brought with calm professionalism. "Mrs. Evans," she said after reviewing everything, "I'm going to need you to tell me about your relationship with your daughter-in-law. Start from the beginning." I found myself thinking back to 8 years ago, when Lucas first brought Mia home to meet us. She had been 25 then, working as a dental hygienist, seemingly sweet and genuinely in love with my son. Harold and I had welcomed her with open arms. She was perfect, I told Detective Chen. Too perfect. I realize now. She always said exactly what we wanted to hear, always agreed with everything Harold and I said. I thought she was just trying to fit in. As I spoke, memories started shifting in my mind, like puzzle pieces rearranging themselves into a clearer picture. Things that had seemed innocent at the time now took on a darker meaning. "About 3 years ago, she started making little comments," I continued. "Nothing obvious, just small suggestions that maybe I was getting forgetful. She'd ask if I remembered conversations we'd supposedly had, events that I was certain had never happened." Mia looked up at me then, her eyes red and swollen. "Mary, I was genuinely concerned." "No," I cut her off, surprising myself with the strength in my voice. "You were planting seeds, making me question my own memory." Detective Chen turned to Eddie. "Mr. Kowalski, can you tell me more about what you witnessed at the law firm?" Eddie pulled out a small notebook, his hands remarkably steady considering his situation. "About 6 months ago, Mrs. Mia Evans started coming to the office regularly. At first, Mr. Morrison told us she was just asking about estate planning for her husband's family. But then the meetings became more secretive." He flipped through his notebook. "I started paying attention because something felt wrong. She would bring documents that she claimed were from doctors, statements from family, friends, even photographs that were supposed to show Mrs. Evans in confused states." "What kind of photographs?" Detective Chen asked. Mia shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Eddie looked at her with disgust before answering. "Pictures of Mrs. Evans at the grocery store, at the bank, at family gatherings. But they were taken from far away, and the captions were lies. One photo showed Mrs. Evans at a checkout counter, and Mia's statement claimed she had been confused about money and unable to complete her purchase. but I could see in the photo that Mrs. Evans was simply chatting with the cashier while her groceries were being bagged. My hands clenched into fists. The violation felt almost physical. "You were following me, taking pictures of me." Mia's voice was barely a whisper. "I needed documentation. The lawyer said they needed evidence." "Evidence of what?" "Of me living my normal life." Detective Chen made notes as she spoke. "Mrs. Evans, were you aware of any financial difficulties your son and daughter-in-law might have been experiencing?" I shook my head. "Lucas always seemed to be doing well. He has his own consulting business. They live in a beautiful house in Maple Ridge. They take expensive vacations every year." "All funded by debt," Mia said suddenly, her voice bitter. "The house has 2 mortgages. The business is barely breaking even. The vacations went on credit cards. We owe over $300,000. The number hit me like a punch to the stomach. $300,000, how is that possible? "Lucas's business started failing 2 years ago," Mia continued, tears streaming down her face again. "He was too proud to tell you and Harold. He kept borrowing money, thinking he could turn it around. When Harold got sick, we realized the inheritance might be our only way out." I stared at her, trying to process this information. My son, struggling financially for 2 years, and he hadn't said a word to us. Harold would have helped in an instant if he had known. "So instead of asking for help, you decided to steal from me," I said. "It wasn't stealing," Mia protested weakly. "You would have been taken care of," Eddie snorted. "A trust that would have paid you $40,000 a year while the rest of the estate went to cover their debts. I saw the calculations. Mrs. Evans, they were planning to use your husband's money to pay off their credit cards and mortgages while keeping you on what amounted to an allowance." The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. This wasn't just about money. This was about my son and his wife systematically planning to control every aspect of my life. "Does Lucas know?" I asked Mia. "Is he part of this?" She hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. "He knows about the debts," she said finally. "And he knows we were hoping the inheritance would solve our problems. But he doesn't know about the fake documents or the lies about your mental state. He thinks Harold really did change his will because he was concerned about you." Detective Chen looked up from her notes. "So, your husband believes his father genuinely thought his mother was becoming incompetent." Mia nodded miserably. "I've been telling him stories for months. Little incidents that supposedly happened when he wasn't around. I made him believe that Harold was worried about your memory, your decision-making abilities. The room felt like it was spinning. Not only had Mia been lying to me, she had been poisoning my relationship with my own son, making him believe his father had lost faith in me." "What incidents?" I demanded. Mia looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. "I told him you forgot to turn off the stove and nearly started a fire, that you got lost driving to the grocery store, that you accused the mailman of stealing from you, that you hid money around the house, and then forgot where you put it." Each lie felt like a physical blow. "None of that ever happened." "I know," she whispered. Detective Chen closed her notebook. "Mrs. Evans, I'm going to need you to come to the station to give a formal statement, and I'll need copies of all these documents." She looked at the attorneys who had been sitting silently through the entire conversation. "Gentlemen, we'll be investigating your involvement in this matter as well." Morrison finally spoke up. "Detective, we were acting on information provided to us by our client. If that information was falsified, we're as much victims here as Mrs. Evans." Eddie laughed bitterly. "Victims, you charge them $50,000 to forge documents and fabricate evidence. I have copies of your invoices." The lead attorney's face went white. "That's not... We don't..." "Save it," Detective Chen said. "You can explain it all downtown." As the police began gathering evidence and taking statements, I found myself looking at Mia one more time. This woman who had shared holidays with us, who had hugged me and called me Mom, who had sat beside Harold's hospital bed during his final days. "Was any of it real?" I asked her. "The last 8 years, the family dinners, the conversations we had, was any of it real?" Mia looked up at me with genuine tears in her eyes. "At first, yes. When I met Lucas, when we got married, I really did care about you and Harold. But when the money problems started getting worse, when we realized how much the estate was worth, she didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. I understood. Somewhere along the way, her love for my son had turned into something darker. Desperation had transformed her from the woman who had genuinely cared about our family into someone willing to destroy me to save herself. As Detective Chen prepared to escort everyone out, I realized something that chilled me to the bone. If Eddie hadn't warned me, if he hadn't risked everything to tell me the truth, I would have walked into this meeting completely unprepared. I would have signed those papers believing my beloved Harold had lost faith in me in his final weeks. I would have spent the rest of my life thinking my husband had died believing I was incompetent, while his money was used to pay for the very lies that had convinced him I couldn't be trusted. The thought was so horrific that I had to sit down again, my legs suddenly too weak to support me. But then I looked at Eddie, this unlikely guardian angel who had saved me from a fate worse than losing my inheritance. He had given me back something infinitely more precious, the truth about Harold's faith in me. Now I had to decide what to do with that truth. 3 days after the police station, I sat in my kitchen staring at my phone. Lucas had called 17 times since Detective Chen had contacted him. 17 calls I hadn't answered because I wasn't ready to hear his voice, wasn't ready to know how much of his wife's poison he had absorbed. Eddie had come by twice, bringing me copies of documents and checking to make sure I was all right. This man who lived out of his car cared more about my well-being than my own daughter-in-law had. The irony wasn't lost on me. The doorbell rang at exactly 2 buzzers, just as I had expected. Through the peephole, I could see Lucas standing on my porch, his face haggard and his usually perfect hair disheveled. Next to him stood Mia, looking smaller and more fragile than I had ever seen her. I opened the door but didn't invite them in. "Mom," Lucas said, his voice cracking on the single word. "We need to talk." I studied my son's face, searching for signs of the man I had raised. He looked exhausted, older than his 33 years. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his clothes looked like he had slept in them. "Do we?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Please, Mom, let us come in. Let us explain." I stepped aside, but only because I needed to hear what he had to say. I needed to know how much he knew, how much he had participated in his wife's scheme. They sat on the couch Harold and I had picked out together 15 years ago, the same couch where we had welcomed Mia into our family when Lucas first brought her home, the same couch where we had shared countless family moments that now felt tainted by lies. Detective Chen told me everything, Lucas said without preamble. About the fake documents, the forged medical reports, the lies about Dad changing his will. And I had no idea. Mom, I swear to you, I had no idea Mia was doing any of that. I remained standing, my arms crossed. "But you knew about the debts." His face crumpled. "Yes, we're drowning. Mom, the business is failing. We owe money everywhere. And I was too ashamed to tell you and Dad. I kept thinking I could fix it, that I could turn things around before you ever had to know. So when Harold got sick, you started thinking about the inheritance." Lucas flinched as if I had slapped him. "Not like that. Not the way you're making it sound." "Then how now?" Mia spoke up for the first time since entering my house. "Lucas, tell her the truth, all of it." I turned to look at her, surprised. The woman sitting on my couch looked nothing like the confident manipulator I had seen at the law office. She looked broken, defeated. Lucas ran his hands through his hair. "When Dad got his diagnosis, when we knew he only had months left, I started panicking about what would happen to you after he was gone. You'd be all alone in this big house, managing everything by yourself. I'm 64, Lucas, not 94. I know, but Mia started pointing out little things, times when you seemed confused or forgetful. She said Dad had mentioned being worried about you." I felt my anger flare. "What little things?" Lucas looked uncomfortable. "Like when you forgot about our dinner plans last Christmas, or when you couldn't remember the name of our neighbor's new dog, or when you put the milk in the pantry instead of the refrigerator." I stared at him in disbelief. "Lucas, you canceled dinner at the last minute because Mia got sick. The neighbor's dog is named Butterscotch, and I knew that perfectly well. And putting milk in the pantry once after working in the garden for 3 hours doesn't make me senile." The confusion on his face was genuine. He looked from me to Mia and back again. But Mia said Mia lied, I said flatly. About everything. Mia was crying again, silent tears streaming down her face. I twisted things, she whispered. I took normal, everyday moments and made them sound like symptoms of dementia. I made you see problems that weren't there. Lucas looked like someone had pulled the ground out from under him. Why would you do that? Because I was desperate, Mia said. Because we were losing everything. And I thought if you believed your mother needed help managing the estate, maybe you'd be more willing to let us handle things for her. Handle things, I repeated. You mean steal from me? No, Mia protested weakly. We would have taken care of you. Under your control, she said. $40,000 a year while you used Harold's money to pay off your credit cards and mortgages. Lucas's head snapped up. What are you talking about? Ask your wife about the trust she had the lawyers draw up. Ask her about how much of the estate was going to be used to pay your debts while I lived on an allowance. I watched as understanding dawned on Lucas's face. The horror. The realization of just how thoroughly he had been manipulated by his own wife. Mia, he said, his voice barely audible. Tell me she's wrong. Mia couldn't meet his eyes. The lawyer said it was the best way to protect everyone's interests. Everyone's interests? Lucas exploded, jumping up from the couch. You were planning to steal my mother's inheritance. We were drowning, Mia screamed back, her composure finally cracking completely. Your business was failing. We owed money to everyone, and you were too proud to ask for help. I was trying to save us. By destroying my mother. The raw pain in Lucas's voice cut through my anger. I could see him realizing not just what Mia had done, but how she had used his love for me against both of us, how she had made him complicit in doubting his own mother while believing he was protecting me. Lucas, I said quietly. Sit down. He sank back onto the couch, looking like a man who had just discovered his entire life was built on lies. I want you to understand something, I continued. Your father never doubted me. Not once. Not ever. His will was never changed. He never questioned my ability to manage our affairs. The man you knew, the father who raised you, that man trusted me completely until the day he died. Lucas broke down then, sobbing like he had when he was a little boy. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I believed her. I should have known better than that. You should have, I agreed. But she was very good at what she did. I looked at Mia, who was staring at her hands in her lap. How long have you been planning this? When did you decide I was the enemy? You were never the enemy, she said. But when the debt started piling up, when we realized we might lose everything, I started thinking about the inheritance differently. Your husband's estate is worth over $2 million, Mary. That money could solve all our problems. That money was Harold's life's work. Money he saved so I could live comfortably after he was gone. You don't need $2 million, Mia said, a flash of her old resentment showing through. You live simply. You don't travel. You don't spend money on expensive things. That money would just sit there while we lost our house, our car, everything we've worked for. And there it was, the real Mia, the woman who believed she deserved Harold's money more than I did because she would spend it, while I would save it. The woman who had convinced herself that stealing from me was actually noble because I didn't deserve what my husband had left me. Lucas looked at his wife like he was seeing her for the first time. Mia, how could you think like that? How could you believe you had any right to Mom's inheritance? Because she doesn't need it, Mia shouted. Because we do. Because you were too stubborn and proud to ask for help when we needed it. So instead of asking, you decided to take. I said. The room fell silent except for the sound of Mia's crying and Lucas's ragged breathing. Finally, Lucas spoke. Mom, what happens now to us, to our family? It was the question I had been asking myself for 3 days. What did happen now? My daughter-in-law had tried to steal my inheritance through an elaborate scheme involving forged documents and false medical reports. My son had been manipulated into doubting his own mother's competence. The lawyers who were supposed to protect Harold's wishes had been willing to fabricate evidence for the right price. But underneath all of that was a deeper question: could this family be saved? I looked at Lucas. at the genuine remorse and horror on his face. Then I looked at Mia, still defiant even in her defeat. "That depends," I said finally, "on what you're both willing to do to make this right." The silence in my living room stretched on for what felt like hours. Lucas sat with his head in his hands while Mia stared at the floor, her tears finally spent. I remained standing, waiting for one of them to speak first, to show me who they really were beneath all the lies and desperation. It was Lucas who broke the silence. "What do you want us to do?" "Mom," I had spent 3 sleepless nights thinking about that question. What did I want just as revenge or something harder to define? The restoration of trust that might be impossible to rebuild. "I want the truth," I said. "All of it. Every lie. Every manipulation. Every moment when you chose to doubt me instead of trust me." Lucas lifted his head, his eyes red and swollen. "I'll tell you everything I know. But Mom, I swear to you, I thought I was protecting you. Mia convinced me that Dad was worried about your memory, that he wanted to make sure you were taken care of." "How?" I asked. "What exactly did she tell you?" Lucas glanced at his wife, who still wouldn't look up from the floor. "She said Dad had mentioned it to her during one of his doctor visits, that he was concerned about leaving you alone with so much responsibility." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Mia was with Harold at his doctor visits. Sometimes," Lucas said. "When I couldn't get away from work, she offered to drive him, to help him keep track of his medications and appointments." I turned to look at Mia. "You used my husband's illness as an opportunity to manipulate my son." Finally, she looked up at me. "Harold never said anything about being worried about you, but he was so weak during those last months, so dependent on everyone around him. It made it easy to suggest that maybe he should be thinking about what would happen to you after he was gone." "Suggest to whom?" I demanded. "To Lucas. I would mention things when we got home from the appointments. Little comments about how frail Harold was getting, how much he was depending on you for everything. I made it sound like Harold was concerned about burdening you." The betrayal cut deeper than I had thought possible. This woman had used my husband's final months, when he was at his most vulnerable, to plant seeds of doubt about me in our son's mind. "What else?" I asked, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. Mia wiped her nose with a tissue. "I started paying attention to everything you did. Every time you forgot where you put your keys. Every time you had to ask someone to repeat themselves. Every normal thing that happens to everyone every day. I would mention it to Lucas later. Make it sound concerning. And you believed her," I said to Lucas. "She was so subtle about it. Mom, she never said you were having problems directly. She would just mention things casually, like she was worried but didn't want to make a big deal about it. Over time, it started to seem like there was a pattern." I thought back over the past year, trying to remember interactions with both of them. Had I noticed Mia paying unusual attention to my words and actions? Had there been signs I had missed? "The photographs," I said suddenly. "When did you start following me?" Mia shifted uncomfortably. "About 4 months ago. The lawyers said they would need documentation if we were going to challenge your competency." "Challenge my competency," I repeated. "You were planning to have me declared mentally unfit." "No," Lucas said quickly. "That's not what we discussed." "That's exactly what we discussed," Mia snapped, turning to face her husband. "Lucas, stop pretending you didn't know what this was about. We talked about setting up a conservatorship, about making sure your mother was protected from making bad financial decisions." Lucas's face went white. "I thought we were talking about helping her manage things, not taking away her rights." "They're the same thing," Mia said. "A conservatorship would have protected her while making sure the money was used responsibly." "Responsibly," I said. "You mean to pay off your debts?" "The debts were destroying us," Mia said, her voice rising again. "Do you have any idea what it's like to lose everything, to have creditors calling you every day, to know that you're going to lose your house, your car, everything you've worked for? Do you have any idea what it's like to discover that your own family has been plotting against you?" I shot back. "To learn that the people you trusted most in the world were planning to have you declared incompetent so they could steal your money." "We weren't going to steal anything," Lucas protested weakly. "The trust would have provided for you." "Lucas," I said, my voice gentler now because I could see he was finally understanding what had really been planned. The trust Mia and the lawyers designed would have given me $40,000 a year to live on while the rest of Harold's estate paid off your debts. After that money was gone. What then? He stared at me, the full implications finally sinking in. There wouldn't have been anything left. Nothing, I confirmed. Your father worked for 45 years, saved every penny he could, invested carefully, and built an estate that would have allowed me to live comfortably for the rest of my life. Your wife's plan would have wiped it out in 5 years. Mia stood up suddenly, her face flushed with anger. This is all easy for you to judge. Mary, you've never been in debt. You've never faced losing everything. You don't know what desperation feels like. You're right, I said. I don't know what it feels like to be in your situation, but I know what it feels like to be betrayed by people I love. And I know what it feels like to discover that someone I welcomed into my family was willing to destroy me to save herself. I wasn't trying to destroy you, Mia said. I was trying to save my marriage, my family, my life. At the cost of mine. The words hung in the air between us. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw genuine recognition in Mia's eyes. She finally understood what she had done, what she had been willing to do. Lucas stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the garden Harold and I had planted together 20 years ago. What happens to us now? Mom, to our family? It was the question I had been dreading, because the truth was, I didn't know if we could come back from this. Trust, once broken so completely, might be impossible to repair. The lawyers will face criminal charges, I said. Eddie has provided enough evidence to prove they were involved in document forgery and fraud. And Mia? Lucas asked without turning around. I looked at my daughter-in-law, this woman who had seemed so perfect when Lucas first brought her home. That depends on what she does next. What do you mean? Mia asked. Detective Chen told me that if you cooperate fully with the investigation, if you testify against the lawyers and help expose how this scheme worked, the district attorney might be willing to consider a plea agreement. And if I don't, then you'll face the full consequences of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy charges. Eddie's evidence is thorough enough to convict you without your cooperation. Mia sank back down onto the couch. What kind of plea agreement? I don't know. That would be between you, your lawyer, and the district attorney. But Mia, you need to understand something. Even if you avoid prison, even if you get probation or community service, this doesn't go away. You tried to steal from me. You manipulated my son into doubting me. You used my husband's illness to further your scheme. I know, she whispered. Do you? I asked. Because 5 minutes ago, you were still defending what you did. You were still acting like I didn't deserve the money Harold left me. Mia looked up at me with something that might have been genuine remorse. I was wrong. I can see that now. I let desperation turn me into someone I don't recognize. Someone willing to destroy an innocent person to get what you wanted. Yes. It was such a small word, but it carried the weight of everything that had happened. Finally, an admission without excuses or justifications. Lucas turned back from the window. Mom, is there any possibility that we can fix this, that our family can survive this? I looked at my son, this man I had raised to be honest and kind, who had been manipulated into participating in his own mother's betrayal. Then I looked at Mia, who had orchestrated it all. I don't know, I said honestly, but I know what has to happen first. They both waited for me to continue. Mia has to face the consequences of what she's done. She has to cooperate with the police, testify against the lawyers, and accept whatever punishment the court decides is appropriate. And Lucas, you have to decide whether you can stay married to someone who is willing to do this to your mother. Lucas's face crumpled. Mom, she's my wife. I love her. I know you do, I said gently. But love isn't always enough. Trust is the foundation of any relationship. And she didn't just betray me. She manipulated you, lied to you, used your love for me against both of us. I can change, Mia said desperately. I can be better. I can earn back your trust. Can you? I asked. Because this wasn't a moment of weakness. Mia, this was months of planning, months of lies, months of watching me go about my daily life while plotting to destroy it. This was who you chose to be. The room fell silent again. Outside, I could hear children playing in the neighborhood, the normal sounds of life continuing while my world had been turned upside down. What do you want from us? Lucas asked finally. I want you to choose, I said. Both of you. Choose who you want to be going forward. Choose whether you want to be people who can live with the consequences of your actions or people who keep making excuses for them. It wasn't the answer they wanted, but it was the only one I had, because the truth was, I couldn't make this decision for them. I couldn't force Lucas to leave his wife, and I couldn't force Mia to become a different person. All I could do was decide what I was willing to accept in my own life, and I was no longer willing to accept being betrayed by people who claimed to love me. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of legal meetings, police interviews, and sleepless nights. Detective Chen had been thorough in her investigation, digging deeper into the scheme than even Eddie had known. What emerged was a pattern of deception that went beyond anything I could have imagined. It turned out that Mia had been recording my phone conversations for months, secretly installing tracking software on my phone, and even accessing my email. She had created an elaborate digital surveillance network designed to gather any evidence that could be twisted to support the narrative that I was mentally incompetent. But perhaps most disturbing of all was what Detective Chen discovered about Mia's past. This wasn't the first time she had attempted something like this. 6 years before meeting Lucas, she had been involved in a similar scheme with an elderly aunt. The case had been settled quietly, with the family choosing not to press charges, but the pattern was unmistakable. She's what we call a predator of opportunity, Detective Chen explained during one of our meetings. She looks for vulnerabilities and exploits them. In her previous case, it was her aunt's isolation after her uncle died. With you, it was the combination of Harold's death and your son's financial troubles. I sat in Chen's office, staring at the file she had compiled. Photos of me going about my daily life, screenshots of emails taken from my account, recordings of phone calls between me and friends where I simply forgot minor details, all carefully cataloged and annotated to build a false narrative. How did Eddie know? I asked. How did he figure all this out when no one else did? Chen smiled. Mr. Kowalski isn't just some random homeless man. He was a paralegal with a specialty in elder law for over 20 years. He worked for Morrison and Associates for 12 years before being fired for questioning their ethics. And it turns out he had been keeping detailed records of suspicious activities at the firm for nearly 5 years. Why didn't he go to the authorities sooner? Fear, Chen said simply. He was worried about retaliation. These are powerful people with connections. It wasn't until he saw your case developing, saw the parallels with other cases he'd documented, that he felt compelled to act. I think your husband's kindness toward him was the final push he needed. The mention of Harold brought tears to my eyes. Even now, months after his death, his influence was still protecting me. As I was leaving the station, Eddie was waiting outside. He looked better than when I'd first met him, cleaner, more rested. He'd been staying at a shelter while working with the police. Mrs. Evans, he said with a nod, I wanted to check in on you, see how you're holding up. We walked to a small cafe across from the station, over coffee. I learned more about this man who had risked everything to help me. I was married once, he told me, 25 years ago. My wife, Elaine, developed early-onset dementia. She was only 42 when she was diagnosed. He paused, staring into his coffee. I watched as her family tried to take control of our finances, claiming I couldn't be trusted to make decisions for her. They almost succeeded until a kind paralegal at the law firm they were using tipped me off. That's when I decided to change careers, to help protect others from what nearly happened to us. What happened to Elaine? I asked gently. She passed away 15 years ago, he said. But we had 7 good years together after I stopped her family's scheme. 7 years where she was treated with dignity, where her wishes were respected, where she could make her own choices for as long as she was able. And now you do the same for others, I said. He shrugged. I try. When Morrison started bringing in clients like Mia, I knew something was wrong. They were clearly coaching them on how to document symptoms of mental decline. I started keeping notes, copying documents when I could. I didn't know what I'd do with the information, but I couldn't just watch it happen. "Why were you homeless?" I asked. "If you don't mind my asking." "After they fired me, they blacklisted me with every law firm in the city, claimed I'd breached confidentiality, I couldn't get work, ran through my savings, lost my apartment 3 weeks ago, just before I saw your case cross Morrison's desk." I reached across the table and took his hand. "Thank you. Eddie, I don't know how I can ever repay you." He smiled, a genuine warm smile that transformed his weathered face. "Seeing justice done is payment enough, Mrs. Evans," but I knew it wasn't enough. This man had saved me from a living nightmare. There had to be something more I could do. That evening, I received a call from Lucas. "Mom," he said, his voice tight with emotion, "can I come over alone? I need to talk to you." An hour later, he sat at my kitchen table, a man broken by the weight of betrayal and guilt. "Mia's taken the plea deal," he said without preamble. 3 years probation, 500 hours of community service, full restitution of the legal fees paid to Morrison and Associates, and mandatory therapy. I nodded. Detective Chen had already informed me, but I waited for Lucas to continue. "I've filed for divorce," he said, and the words hung in the air between us. "I found more, Mom, so much more than what she admitted to us. Credit cards in my name I never knew about, loans against my business, a whole secret financial life she'd been hiding from me for years." Tears filled his eyes. How could I have been so blind? How could I not have seen what was happening right in front of me? I reached across the table and took his hand, much as I had done with Eddie earlier that day. "Because you trusted her," I said. "Because trust is what we're supposed to give the people we love." Lucas broke down then, deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place of profound loss. I moved to his side of the table and held him as I had when he was a little boy with a skinned knee or a broken toy. Only now, what was broken wasn't so easily fixed. When his tears finally subsided, he looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Can you ever forgive me, Mom?" It was the question I had been asking myself for weeks. Could I forgive my son for doubting me, for being manipulated into participating in a scheme that could have destroyed my life? "Lucas," I said carefully, "forgiveness isn't something that happens all at once. It's a choice I make every day. Some days it's easier than others." His eyes filled with tears again. "But yes," I continued, "I can forgive you. I have forgiven you, because I can see that you were a victim too. Mia used your love for me against both of us, and that wasn't your fault." "It feels like it was my fault," he said. "I should have known better. I should have trusted you more than I trusted her." "You should have," I agreed. "But you didn't, and we can't change that. What we can do is build something better going forward." Lucas wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "What does that look like?" "It looks like honesty," I said, complete honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. "It looks like you coming to me when you're struggling instead of trying to handle everything alone. It looks like us rebuilding trust one conversation at a time. And if I mess up again," I smiled, "then we'll deal with it together. But Lucas, you're not the same man you were 3 months ago. You've learned something about yourself, about what you're capable of when you're desperate. That knowledge will protect you from making the same mistakes again." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, both of us processing the long journey that had brought us to this moment. "What about Mia?" Lucas asked finally. "Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive her?" I considered the question carefully. I don't know. What she did was calculated, deliberate, cruel. She didn't just make a mistake or let desperation cloud her judgment for a moment. She spent months planning to destroy me, and she enjoyed doing it. She says she's changed. Maybe she has. People can change, Lucas. But forgiveness isn't about whether someone has changed. It's about whether I'm willing to carry the burden of anger and resentment. And I've decided I'm not. So you have forgiven her. I've let go of the anger. I clarified. That's not the same as forgiveness, and it's certainly not the same as trust. Mia will never be welcome in my life again. But I refuse to let her steal any more of my peace. Lucas nodded. I think I understand. As he prepared to leave, I walked him to the door. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. It was the kind of sunset Harold and I used to watch together from our back porch, his hand in mine as we talked about our dreams for the future. Mom, Lucas said as he hugged me goodbye, thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for finding your way back, I replied. A week later, I sat in my lawyer's office, finalizing the changes to my own will and estate plans. After everything that had happened, I needed to ensure my wishes would be respected and that my assets would be protected. These documents establish a trust for Lucas, my attorney, Sarah Goldberg, explained. But with specific conditions, the money can only be used for certain expenses, education, healthcare, housing, and it's structured to prevent any future spouse from accessing the funds. What about Eddie? I asked. Sarah smiled. As we discussed, the codicil establishes a lifetime stipend for Mr. Kowalski, as well as the transfer of ownership of the guest house on your property. I nodded, satisfied. After learning Eddie's full story, I had offered him the small guest house that sat at the edge of my property, originally built for Harold's mother before she passed. Eddie had initially refused, but I insisted. It wasn't charity, it was justice. This man had saved me from a fate worse than financial ruin. He had preserved my autonomy, my dignity, and the truth about Harold's faith in me. Mrs. Evans, Sarah said, hesitating slightly, I hope you don't mind my asking, but after everything you've been through, aren't you worried about trusting Mr. Kowalski? You've only known him a short time, and he was homeless when I met him. I finished for her. Sarah, Eddie could have taken Morrison's offer of a settlement. They tried to buy his silence with $75,000 and a position at another firm. He refused. He risked everything to do what was right. That tells me more about his character than any background check ever could. Sarah nodded. I understand. And I've reviewed all the legal documents thoroughly. Everything seems in order. As I signed the papers, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. For the first time since Harold's death, I felt I was making decisions about my own future rather than simply reacting to the plots of others. That evening, Eddie moved into the guest house. He had few possessions, some clothes, books, a laptop, and a box of legal documents he'd salvaged before being evicted from his apartment. I helped him settle in, bringing over extra linens and kitchenware from the main house. Mrs. Evans, he said as we finished arranging the small living room, I don't know how to thank you for this. I never expected. Mary, I said. Please call me Mary. And there's no need for thanks. You saved me from a nightmare. Eddie, this is the least I can do in return. He looked around the modest but comfortable space with something like wonder. I never thought I'd have a home again. Well, now you do. And if you're interested, I could use some help managing the property. Harold always handled the maintenance, and I'm afraid I'm a bit out of my depth. Eddie smiled. I'd be happy to help. I'm pretty handy. Actually, worked construction in my younger days, before law school. As we walked back to the main house for dinner, I realized I wasn't just giving Eddie a place to stay or a job. I was rebuilding my support system, surrounding myself with people I could truly trust. After Mia's betrayal, trust felt like a rare and precious commodity, something to be given carefully and with clear eyes. Over the next month, a new routine began to take shape. Eddie helped around the property, fixing things that had fallen into disrepair since Harold's death. I volunteered at the local literacy center, teaching adults to read, something I'd always wanted to do but never found time for during Harold's illness. Lucas came by every Sunday for dinner. Our conversations were tentative at first, both of us careful with our words, afraid of reopening wounds that had barely begun to heal. But gradually, the tension eased. We started to find our way back to the easy rapport we'd once shared. One Sunday, he arrived with news. I've rented an office downtown, he said as we sat in the garden after dinner. Nothing fancy, Just a small space to rebuild my consulting business. And I've lined up 2 new clients already. That's wonderful, Lucas. He smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. I had to sell the house in Maple Ridge. It was too big for just me. And honestly, too full of memories. The new place is a small apartment downtown, closer to the office. How are the finances? I asked gently. He sighed. Bad, but manageable. The divorce settlement took most of the proceeds from the house sale. Mia's keeping her car and jewelry, but I'm responsible for the business debts. It'll take years to dig out completely, but I've worked out payment plans with most of the creditors. I'd offered to help numerous times, but Lucas had refused. I need to fix this myself, Mom, he'd insisted. It's the only way I'll learn. I respected his decision, even as it pained me to watch him struggle. His pride had gotten him into this mess, but perhaps a different kind of pride, the pride of self-reliance and integrity, would get him out of it. Have you heard from Mia? I asked. Lucas nodded. She's working at the downtown community food bank as part of her community service. Apparently, she's good with the clients. The director even mentioned offering her a paid position when her hours are completed. I felt a complex mix of emotions at this news. Part of me was glad Mia was finding a constructive path forward. Another part remained deeply skeptical of any apparent transformation. Do you miss her? I asked. Lucas was quiet for a long moment. I miss who I thought she was, he said finally. The woman I fell in love with. The woman I believed I married. But that person never really existed. She was a character Mia created, a role she played until it no longer served her purposes. He looked out across the garden, to the apple trees Harold and I had planted when Lucas was born. They were heavy with fruit now, almost ready for harvest. The hardest part, he continued, is that I keep second-guessing everything, every memory, every conversation, every decision I made during our marriage. How much of it was real? How much was manipulation? I don't know if I'll ever be able to sort it all out. I reached over and took his hand. Some things don't need to be sorted out, Lucas. Some things just need to be accepted and then left behind. As the sun began to set, Eddie joined us, bringing a pot of coffee and slices of the apple pie I'd baked that morning. The 3 of us sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky change from blue to orange to deep purple. In that moment, I realized we had formed a new kind of family, one built not on blood or legal ties, but on shared experience and hard-won trust. It wasn't what I had envisioned for my life after Harold, but it was real and solid in a way my relationship with Mia had never been. Later that night, after Lucas and Eddie had both gone home, I sat on my back porch alone, looking up at the stars. I thought about Harold, about how much he would have approved of the choices I'd made. He had always valued integrity above all else, had taught Lucas the same, and would have been proud to see our son finding his way back to those principles. I'm doing okay, Harold, I whispered to the night sky. I'm finding my way. As if in response, a cool breeze stirred the wind chimes he had hung years ago. Their gentle melody filled the darkness, reminding me that even in absence, love persists. Even after betrayal, healing is possible. Even at 64, new beginnings await you. 6 months after that fateful day at Morrison & Associates, I sat in my garden on a crisp October morning, watching the leaves change color on the maple tree Harold and I had planted for Lucas's 10th birthday. The seasons had a way of putting things in perspective. What seemed permanent and unchangeable in spring could be transformed completely by fall. Mia had begun her probation and community service. The lawyers had received their sentences. Morrison got 4 years, his associates 2 years each. Eddie had been key to their convictions, his detailed documentation and brave testimony ensuring they faced the full consequences of their actions. But the legal resolution was only part of the story. The real healing had taken much longer and was still ongoing. I sipped my coffee and watched as Eddie trimmed the hedges along the property line. In the months since he'd moved into the guest house, he had transformed the grounds. The flower beds Harold had loved were thriving again. The vegetable garden was producing more than I could eat. We'd taken to donating the excess to the very food bank where Mia was completing her community service. Mrs. W., Eddie called out as he walked across the lawn, carrying a tray with 2 cups of coffee. Thought you might like a refill this morning. I smiled as he settled into the chair beside me. Thank you. Eddie, how are you feeling about today? Today was significant. It was the day Mia's probation officer was coming to verify her community service hours. She had been assigned to work at the downtown community food bank, helping to prepare and serve meals for people experiencing homelessness. People like Eddie had been just months ago. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. I hope she's learning something, Eddie said thoughtfully. Not everyone who ends up desperate makes the choices she made. It was true. Eddie had lost his job, his home, his stability. But he had never lost his moral compass. When faced with the opportunity to profit from wrongdoing, he had chosen to do what was right, even when it cost him everything. Have you heard from her lately? I asked. Eddie nodded. She comes to the food bank sometimes when I'm there picking up supplies for the church. She doesn't say much, but she works hard. I think she's finally starting to understand what desperation really looks like. I wasn't sure how I felt about that. Part of me wanted Mia to suffer, to truly comprehend the harm she had caused. But a larger part of me just wanted her to become a better person, someone who would never again be capable of the cruelty she had shown me. My phone buzzed with a text message from Lucas. Coffee later, I have some news. I showed the message to Eddie, who raised an eyebrow. Think it's good news or bad news? With Lucas these days, it's usually both, I replied. In the early afternoon, I drove downtown to meet Lucas at his favorite cafe. The small storefront consulting business he'd established was just around the corner, and he often met clients here. It was a humble beginning compared to the sleek office space he'd once occupied in Maple Ridge, but there was something more authentic about it. Lucas was already seated at an outdoor table when I arrived, nursing a large black coffee. He looked better than he had in months. He had gained back some of the weight he had lost during the stress of the divorce, and there was color in his cheeks again. You look good, I told him as I sat down. I feel good. Mom, really good. For the first time in years. I feel like I'm living my own life instead of trying to manage someone else's crisis. The waitress brought my tea, and Lucas pulled out his phone, showing me a picture of a small storefront with Evans Consulting painted on the window. I signed the lease yesterday, my own office, built the right way this time. And I have something else to show you. He handed me a business card. Under his name were the words, Ethical Financial Recovery Specialist. I've shifted my focus, he explained. I'm helping small businesses that are in financial trouble, not just managing their debts, but teaching them how to restructure, how to be transparent with creditors, how to recover with integrity. Pride swelled in my chest. Harold would be so proud of you. I hope so, Lucas said. I've been thinking about him a lot lately, about the values he tried to teach me, the kind of man he wanted me to become. I lost sight of that for a while. We all did, I said gently, but we found our way back. Lucas reached across the table and took my hand. Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. I squeezed his hand. Always. Can you ever forgive me, really forgive me? Not just say the words because you love me. It was a question I had been asking myself for months. Could I truly forgive my son for doubting me, for being manipulated into participating in a scheme that could have destroyed my life? Lucas, I said carefully, forgiveness isn't something that happens all at once. It's a choice I make every day. Some days it's easier than others. His eyes filled with tears. I understand. But yes, I continued, I can forgive you. I have forgiven you, because I can see that you were a victim too. Mia used your love for me against both of us, and that wasn't your fault. It feels like it was my fault, he said. I should have known better. I should have trusted you more than I trusted her. You should have, I agreed, but you didn't, and we can't change that. What we can do is build something better going forward. Lucas wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. What does that look like? It looks like honesty. I said complete honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. It looks like you coming to me when you're struggling instead of trying to handle everything alone. It looks like us rebuilding trust one conversation at a time. And if I mess up again, I smiled, Then we'll deal with it together. But Lucas, you're not the same man you were 6 months ago. You've learned something about yourself, about what you're capable of when you're desperate. That knowledge will protect you from making the same mistakes again. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, both of us processing the long journey that had brought us to this moment. What about Mia? Lucas asked finally. Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive her? I considered the question carefully. I don't know. What she did was calculated, deliberate, cruel. She didn't just make a mistake or let desperation cloud her judgment for a moment. She spent months planning to destroy me, and she enjoyed doing it. She says she's changed. Maybe she has. People can change, Lucas, but forgiveness isn't about whether someone has changed. It's about whether I'm willing to carry the burden of anger and resentment. And I've decided I'm not. So you have forgiven her. I've let go of the anger, I clarified. That's not the same as forgiveness. And it's certainly not the same as trust. Mia will never be welcome in my life again. But I refuse to let her steal any more of my peace. Lucas nodded. I think I understand. He took a deep breath. That brings me to my news. I've been offered a position with the Elder Justice Initiative. It's a nonprofit that helps seniors who've been victims of financial exploitation. They want me to head up their prevention program, developing materials to help people recognize the warning signs. Lucas, that's wonderful. His eyes shone with purpose. It feels right, Mom, using what happened to us to help others. The pay is less than half what I made before. But, he shrugged, I've learned I don't need much to be happy. As we finished our coffee, I noticed a familiar figure across the street, exiting the food bank. Mia stood on the sidewalk, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing jeans and a plain sweater, a far cry from the designer clothes she'd favored during her marriage to Lucas. Lucas followed my gaze. Do you want to leave? I shook my head. No. I'm not running from her. Mia looked up then and saw us. For a moment she froze, indecision plain on her face. Then, with a slight nod of acknowledgement, she turned and walked in the opposite direction. Was that weird for you? I asked Lucas. Less than I expected, he admitted. It's like looking at a stranger who happens to resemble someone I used to know. As we walked back to our cars, Lucas surprised me with a hug. Thank you, Mom. For what? For showing me what real strength looks like. 2 weeks later, I found myself doing something I never would have imagined 6 months earlier, volunteering at the downtown community food bank. It wasn't a decision I had made lightly. The food bank was where Mia was completing her community service, and the prospect of regularly encountering her had given me pause. But when Eddie mentioned they were desperately short of volunteers for their literacy program, teaching basic reading skills to homeless individuals, I couldn't resist. Teaching adults to read had been a passion of mine for years, something I'd put on hold during Harold's illness and never returned to. It felt like the right time to reclaim that part of myself. The director, Patricia Jackson, greeted me warmly. Mrs. Evans, we're so grateful to have you. Eddie speaks very highly of your teaching skills. Please, call me Mary, I said, and I'm happy to help. Patricia showed me around the facility, explaining their various programs. We try to address the root causes of homelessness, not just provide temporary relief, education, job training, mental health services. They're all essential. As we turned a corner into the main dining area, I saw Mia supervising a group of volunteers setting up for lunch. She looked up, surprise registering on her face before she quickly returned to her task. Ah, you know Mia, Patricia said, noticing the exchange. Yes, I said simply. Patricia's expression grew thoughtful. She's one of our most dedicated workers. Started as court-ordered community service, but she's here even on her off days now. Has a real gift for connecting with our clients. I didn't respond, unsure what to say. I don't know the full story between you two, Patricia continued, and I don't need to. But I do know that people can change when they're given the opportunity to see the world from a different perspective. The literacy classroom was a small, bright room with bookshelves along one wall and a whiteboard on another. 6 desks were arranged in a semicircle, each with notebooks and pencils neatly laid out. "Your students will be here at 4, Patricia explained. 3 men and 2 women, ages ranging from 30 to 67, all at very basic reading levels. The curriculum is there." She pointed to a binder on the desk. "But feel free to adapt it to your teaching style." Left alone, I took a moment to collect my thoughts. I hadn't expected to feel so nervous. These people would be trusting me with something precious, their hope for a better future. I wanted to honor that trust. At precisely 4 o'clock, my students began arriving. James, a weathered man in his 60s who had lost his construction job after an injury. Maria, a quiet woman in her 40s who had fled domestic violence. Darnell, a young veteran struggling with PTSD. Sarah, a former nurse whose medical bills had bankrupted her after a cancer diagnosis. And finally, Robert, a soft-spoken man in his 50s who had once been a successful accountant before alcoholism cost him everything. "Welcome," I said when they were all seated. "My name is Mary, and I'm here to help you build or rebuild your reading skills. But first, I'd like to learn a bit about each of you and what you hope to gain from these classes." One by one, they shared their stories and goals. James wanted to be able to read well enough to take the contractor licensing exam. Maria dreamed of reading bedtime stories to her grandchildren. Darnell needed to understand his VA benefits paperwork. Sarah hoped to return to nursing someday. Robert simply wanted to enjoy books again, something he had loved before alcohol took over his life. As they spoke, I was struck by how easily any of us could find ourselves in their position. A serious illness, a bad relationship, an addiction, a mental health crisis. The line between stability and homelessness was thinner than most people realized. We spent the next hour working through basic phonics exercises. Despite their initial nervousness, all 5 were eager learners, supporting each other's efforts with encouragement and patience. As we were finishing, there was a knock at the door. Mia stood in the doorway with a cart of coffee and cookies. "Thought you all might like a snack before the evening program," she said, carefully avoiding my gaze. "Thank you, Mia," James said warmly. "You're an angel." She smiled, a genuine smile I hadn't seen from her in years. "Just doing my job." As she set out the refreshments, I noticed how differently she moved, how she spoke with my students. Gone was the polished, calculating woman who had plotted to take over my life. This Mia was softer, humbler, more present. After the students had left, Mia lingered, clearly wanting to speak, but unsure how to begin. "The cookies were a nice touch," I said, breaking the silence. "It was Robert's birthday yesterday," she explained. "He mentioned once that chocolate chip cookies were his favorite childhood memory." I nodded, surprised by this thoughtfulness. "Mary," Mia began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect you to believe I've changed. But I want you to know that I think about what I did to you every day. And every day. I try to be better than I was the day before." I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation, the calculated charm I had come to distrust. But all I saw was exhaustion, remorse, and a quiet determination. "Why here?" I asked. "Why the food bank?" Mia glanced around the room. "It wasn't my choice initially. It was where the court assigned me. But then I met people like James and Robert and Maria, people who had lost everything but still maintained their dignity, their humanity. It made me question who I had become, what I had been willing to do." She paused, collecting herself. "The first month, I was just going through the motions, counting down my hours. Then one day, an elderly woman came in. She reminded me so much of you. Same silver hair, same kind eyes. She was hungry, embarrassed to be there. I helped her through the line, made sure she got extra fruit because she mentioned her doctor wanted her to eat more of it." Tears filled Mia's eyes. She thanked me like I'd given her the world, when all I'd done was treat her with basic decency. And suddenly I could see what I had tried to take from you. Not just money, but your dignity, your autonomy, your peace of mind. It broke something open in me. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to reject her narrative of redemption, to hold on to the certainty that she was irredeemable. But another part recognized the genuine change in her. "I'm not asking for anything from you," Mia continued when I remained silent. "I just wanted you to know that the harm I caused you hasn't been forgotten or dismissed. It's become the catalyst for me to examine who I am and who I want to be." She turned to leave, then stopped. "Your students are lucky to have you. You're a natural teacher." After she left, I sat alone in the classroom, trying to process the encounter. Could people truly change so fundamentally? Or was this just another performance? Another mask Mia was wearing to navigate her current circumstances? I didn't have answers. But as I gathered my teaching materials, I realized that regardless of Mia's sincerity, I felt lighter somehow. Our brief interaction hadn't erased the past, but it had given me a glimpse of a future where her actions no longer held power over my emotional well-being. That evening, I shared the experience with Eddie over dinner in my kitchen. "Do you think she's genuine?" I asked. Eddie considered the question carefully. "I've seen her at the food bank more than you have. At first, I was skeptical, thought it was all for show, trying to impress her probation officer. But lately," he shrugged, "she stays late, comes in on her days off, remembers the clients' names, their stories, their specific needs. If it's an act, it's a very consistent one." "People can change," I mused. "They can," Eddie agreed. "But that doesn't mean you need to let her back into your life." "No," I said firmly. "That door is closed. But maybe I can work at the food bank without letting her presence dictate my choices. Maybe that's its own kind of freedom." Eddie raised his glass of iced tea. "To freedom, then?" I clinked my glass against his. To freedom. As winter gave way to spring, life settled into a new rhythm. I taught at the food bank twice a week, watched my literacy students progress with pride, and gradually learned to navigate occasional encounters with Mia with civil detachment. Lucas's work with the Elder Justice Initiative was thriving. He had developed an educational program that was being implemented in senior centers across the state, helping older adults recognize and avoid financial exploitation. The irony that his expertise came from being an unwitting accomplice to such a scheme wasn't lost on either of us. But he had transformed that painful experience into something that helped others. Eddie had become an indispensable part of my life, not just maintaining the property, but providing friendship and support I hadn't realized how much I needed. His legal background had proven useful for Lucas's nonprofit work, and the two men had developed a genuine bond. One sunny April morning, Detective Chen called with news. "Mrs. Evans, I wanted to let you know that Morrison's appeal was denied. His conviction stands, and he'll serve his full sentence." "Thank you for letting me know," I said. "There's more," Chen continued. "The State Bar Association has completed their investigation. They've identified 7 other cases similar to yours, elderly individuals whose wills were manipulated or who were declared incompetent through fraudulent documentation. They're reaching out to all the victims now." I felt a chill run down my spine. 7 others. "Yes, and we have reason to believe there may be more we haven't identified yet. The association is establishing a special task force, and they've asked if you would consider serving as a civilian consultant. Your experience could be invaluable in helping them understand how these schemes work from the victim's perspective." The request caught me off guard. The thought of revisiting that painful period, of examining similar cases, was daunting. But the possibility of helping others avoid what I had narrowly escaped was compelling. "I'd like to think about it," I told Chen. "Can I let you know in a few days?" "Of course. Take all the time you need." That evening, I shared the news with Lucas and Eddie over dinner. "I think you should do it, Mom," Lucas said without hesitation. "Your perspective would be invaluable." Eddie nodded in agreement. "The legal system doesn't always understand the emotional impact of these cases. You could help change that." But am I ready to immerse myself in that world again? I wondered aloud. To revisit all those feelings of betrayal and violation? Only you can answer that. Eddie said gently, "But from what I've seen, you're stronger than you give yourself credit for." Lucas reached across the table and took my hand. "Whatever you decide, we're here for you." The next day, I visited Harold's grave for the first time in months. The headstone was simple, elegant, just as he would have wanted. I placed fresh flowers in the vase and sat on the small bench nearby. "I could use your advice, Harold," I said softly. "I have a chance to help others avoid what nearly happened to me, but it means opening old wounds, reliving difficult memories." The cemetery was quiet except for the distant chirping of birds and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. "You always said that our experiences, even the painful ones, were never just for us," I continued. "You believed they were meant to be shared, to help others navigate their own struggles." I closed my eyes, letting memories of Harold wash over me, his integrity, his compassion, his unwavering belief in doing what was right, even when it was difficult. "I think I know what you would say," I whispered, "that sometimes the path to healing involves turning our pain into purpose." When I opened my eyes, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't experienced since before Harold's illness. The decision wasn't just about whether I was strong enough to revisit the past. It was about whether I was willing to use my experience to protect others. The next morning, I called Detective Chen. "I'll do it," I said. "I'll serve on the task force." The months that followed were challenging but rewarding, working alongside attorneys, social workers, and law enforcement officials. I helped develop new protocols for identifying and investigating suspicious changes to wills and estate plans. I reviewed case files, looking for patterns similar to what I had experienced. I spoke to other victims, offering understanding that could only come from someone who had walked a similar path. Through it all, Lucas and Eddie remained my anchors, providing support when the work became emotionally draining, celebrating the small victories when our efforts led to charges against exploitative attorneys or the recovery of stolen assets. 1 year to the day after my confrontation in Morrison's office, I received a letter. The return address was from the downtown community food bank, but the handwriting was Mia's. I stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. Inside was a simple note. "Mary, I'm leaving the city next week. I've been offered a full-time position with a homeless outreach program in Seattle. Before I go, I wanted to thank you. Not for forgiveness. I know that's not something I can ask for or expect, but for showing me what true dignity looks like, even in the face of betrayal. The person I was a year ago seems like a stranger to me now. I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the second chance I've been given, a chance I tried to deny you. Your literacy students speak of you with such admiration. You've changed their lives, just as you changed mine, though in a way I never could have anticipated." Mia, there was no request for a response, no plea for reconciliation or absolution, just an acknowledgement of the journey we had both traveled, albeit on very different paths. I folded the letter and placed it in my desk drawer, not to keep, not as a memento of a painful chapter, but as a reminder that transformation was possible, even from the darkest beginnings. That evening, as I sat on my back porch watching the sunset, Eddie joined me with 2 glasses of lemonade. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, settling into the chair beside me. "I was just thinking about cycles," I replied. "How things have a way of coming full circle. A year ago, I was fighting to preserve my autonomy, my dignity. Now I'm helping others do the same." Eddie nodded. "Life has a way of using our wounds as doorways." We sat in comfortable silence, watching as the sky transformed from blue to orange to deep purple, the same colors it had been the day Harold and I had bought this house 30 years ago, the same colors it would be long after we were gone. Lucas's car pulled into the driveway, and I watched as my son, healthier, wiser, more authentic than he had been in years, made his way toward us, carrying a bag from our favorite bakery. "I brought dessert," he called out. "Thought we might celebrate." "Celebrate what?" I asked as he joined us on the porch. "Life," he said simply. "New beginnings. The fact that we're still here, still a family, despite everything." As we shared apple pie, Harold's favorite, I looked at these 2 men who had become my unexpected family. Eddie, who had risked everything to save me from a nightmare. Lucas, who had found his way back to his true self through painful but necessary growth. And I realized that while the past year had begun with betrayal, It had ultimately revealed something far more powerful: the capacity for resilience, for renewal, for finding light even in the darkest circumstances. At 64, I had discovered that life still held surprises, some devastating, others healing. That trust, once broken, could be rebuilt stronger than before. That family wasn't always defined by blood or legal ties, but by who showed up when it mattered most. The night grew cool, and stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference in the lives of others. But tonight, in this moment, there was only gratitude for the journey that had brought me here, to this porch, with these people, under this vast and beautiful sky. "I'm free," I whispered, too softly for anyone but me to hear. And for the first time since Harold's death, I believed it was true. Now I'm curious about you who listen to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.